Hello, everyone, and welcome into this episode of the Bear Down Buzz podcast. As always, myself, Eli Grimes, joined by Joe and Isaac here on the Bear Down Buzz podcast. Rather, I can't talk today, all over the place. But we are previewing the matchup, the NFC North matchup against the Minnesota Vikings this week. First off, as usual, Joe, we will start with the Bears injury report. And you can just go down the list of notable additions to that injury report.
So the most notable injuries on this report right now, Ryan Bates is out with the concussion. He hasn't practiced on Wednesday or Thursday. He most likely will not play because he'll probably still be in concussion protocol. Elijah Hicks did not practice Wednesday or Thursday with an ankle injury. It seems that Jonathan Owens or Austin Colbert, or his name is not Austin Colbert, Adrian Colbert, um, will be who the Bears just resigned to their practice squad will most likely be called up to on Sunday. Owens will probably get the start, but that'll be interesting to see who they actually start. And then DeAndre Swift, uh, he, Matt Eberflus reported on Wednesday that he had a groin injury. He didn't practice Wednesday. Was limited today. I feel like he might. I have a feeling that he's going to play just because if he was limited today, he's probably going to be limited tomorrow. He'll be going into the game as questionable, but he'll most likely play. Um, but if he doesn't, that leaves the Bears with Darrington Evans, uh, who they might call up from the practice squad, and then Travis Homer and Roshan Johnson, and then Tevin Jenkins, who was limited on Wednesday with an ankle injury, and then he was full on Thursday. So he will most likely he's going to be back on Sunday, which is good because we need our full line against this vaunted pass rush of the Vikings. Uh, so I'll pass it over to you, Isaac. What are your thoughts on this injury report?
Yeah, the thing that first caught my attention was Ryan Bates getting a concussion. I kind of feel bad for Ryan Poles because he has a really bad track record of trying to recruit or trade for offensive linemen because last year he traded a sixth rounder for Dan Feeney and he was okay. He started a couple games for us and he was definitely a big help, but he wasn't going to be any long-term solution. And this year, for a lot of Bears fans, they know this that Ryan Poles has a history of trying to acquire Ryan Bates. He first tried to sign him as a free agent, and the Bills matched it. I believe it was in 2022, and then he finally was able to trade for him for a fifth rounder. If correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was a fifth rounder. And I was really hopeful for Bates this season. I thought he was going to be a big part of this offense. Unfortunately, he went down with the injury week one, and then we finally got him back last week against Packers, and then he just another unfortunate injury. So the thing is like this isn't just something that I'm concerned about this week against the Vikings. It's something I'm concerned about going forward because the Bears really need to address the offensive line, and it has to be more than just trading uh day three picks for these guys or signing a back or a starting center for really cheap like Coleman Shelton or something like that. It's got to be more than that. Like this offseason, we got to really attack the offensive line because I'm tired of seeing the Bears always having one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL. But moving on from that, like Joe mentioned, I think Swift is going to play. And even if he doesn't, I don't think the Bears are gonna use anyone else besides Roshan. I mean, they might put in like Homer a couple plays, but I think Roshan will be the only running back that actually gets carries if Swift doesn't play. And the thing for Elijah Hicks, it sucks because he was having a really good season filling in for Jaquan Brisker, and I mean, Jonathan Owens is a okay safety. We'll see if he'll be able to contribute on Sunday if Hicks isn't able to go, which he most likely won't play. But besides that, for being week 11 and there's not a lot of injuries on, key injuries, it's nice. And it's also nice that I want to point out Caleb Williams hasn't been injured at all this season, and knock on wood, but let's hope that continues because with Justin Fields every season, I feel like he was injured for a couple games. I remember I went to the Bears game when they played the Seahawks in Seattle when they won in overtime. and I was so happy to watch Justin Fields play, and he unfortunately didn't. He had an injury, so Nick Foles played that game. And last year, I went to the Bears versus Chargers Sunday Night Football game, and again, I mean, this one I knew Justin Fields wasn't gonna play, but I wasn't really excited to go watch Tyson Bagent. Like, I come living in California, I don't have the opportunity to watch the Bears every season, or whenever like everyone's healthy, I'm okay. Let's go to this game. So I'm just happy that finally we have someone that hopefully is on the field longer and for more of the year than how Justin Fields was. So that's basically my thoughts on the injury report, and I'll toss it back over to you, Eli.
Yeah, so I'm completely with you on the whole Ryan Bates situation. This was a guy that, as you mentioned, Ryan Poles heavily pursued in free agency and just wasn't able to get it done until this year. And you were correct; it is a 2024 fifth round pick that was traded for Ryan Bates. And this was a guy that was put on injury reserve, throughout the season. And we were hoping that when he came back, he was going to be an integral part of this offensive line and kind of give us some stability. Uh, and the offensive line was pretty stable for most of the game against the Green Bay Packers this past week. But that wasn't because of Ryan Bates. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he was only in for a series or two before he got hurt. It really wasn't. He didn't contribute much, and I'd have to go back and really look at it to see how the offensive line looked with him in there. Surely it couldn't have been any worse than it had been, but uh, again, that was supposed to be the guy that was going to shore up this offensive line and kind of give us some consistency and give Caleb Williams some consistency in the pocket. And that just was not the case. So hopefully, again, probably most likely not going to play this week. And we can see some more consistency from the lineup that was there in that Green Bay game, which again had played really well up until the final moments of that game, just giving up 2 consecutive sacks. Like, how does that even happen? But uh, that's another conversation for another day. But aside from the offensive line injuries, a Hicks, that's kind of a big hit because we're already pretty thin at that safety position, and we've talked about it beforehand. We don't necessarily know if we're confident in either Owens or Adrian Colbert coming back. So, and as far as I know, I don't think any news of him being elevated to the active roster has came out yet. So that's another aspect to that, to which maybe could probably give Owens the nod to start in this one. But um, as for DeAndre Swift, I also agree, probably going to play. And in the unlikely scenario that he didn't, I think it would be interesting to kind of see how Roschon Johnson does as the feature back. Again, I'm not 100% sure if there's been a game in his career yet to where he was just the number one back and got the majority of the carries. He's been a split back mostly in his career with the Bears so far, but I've always been a Roschon fan, and I love the way he runs. He gives you kind of elements of Matt Forte to him. You don't want to compare anybody to Matt Forte, but he's a hard runner and he runs inside, and he's great after contact. So um, I am curious to see how that backfield would look without DeAndre Swift, but we need all the help we can get offensively right now. So hopefully he'll be good to go, and it seems like it's leaning that way. So that's really the only notable ones on the injury report for the Chicago Bears. As we kind of move into the Minnesota Vikings, Wednesday and Thursday, tight end Josh Oliver did not practice. And another notable name, notable names on this injury report for the Vikings are Sam Darnold and Aaron Jones. Jones was listed on the injury report on Wednesday and Thursday as a full participant in both those days with a rib injury, so he looks like he's going to be good to go for this one. And Sam Darnold was limited on Wednesday, but was a full participant in practice on Thursday with a foot injury. So obviously 2 integral pieces to that Vikings offense right now that look like they're going to be good to go. Do you guys have any thoughts? Isaac, I'll start with you. If you don't have any, that's completely fine. Joe, do you have any thoughts on this Vikings injury report?
No, I mean, like you said, Darnold's going to play, and so is most likely Aaron Jones. So there really isn't much to be worried. There wasn't much for them to be worried about in terms of injuries on their team, and we don't have to uh, worry about, or we don't have like, I don't know the right word to use, but we don't need to. That we know we're facing them at full strength. So yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, I completely agree that, there's not much in past weeks. The opponents, we kind of monitored some of their injuries to see who we'd be going up against. So I completely get where you're coming from there. This should be a relatively healthy Viking squad that we're playing outside of Christian Darrisaw, who earlier in the year did suffer that injury is out for the year. But they did sign Cam Robinson from the Jaguars earlier in the year to shore up that left tackle spot for the Vikings there on that offensive line. So uh, we've mentioned this earlier that interior offensive line is kind of their weak spot there on the offensive line. But aside from that, it's a pretty solid unit under Kevin O'Connell right now. So we're going to have to get some of that interior pressure that we've severely been lacking these last few weeks. But unless you guys have anything else regarding these injury reports, we can kind of get into this matchup. Um, I think the number one thing this week that we kind of have to capitalize on, at least defensively, is the run defense. This is a week to where we really have to be willing to go there and to perform better than we have been, because in the last few weeks, this Vikings run game, Aaron Jones has been a bit banged up throughout the past few weeks, but they've been averaging under 3 yards per carry against most opponents. We mentioned it earlier in the year, obviously, when we previewed that Titans game, or rather reviewed it afterwards, that that interior defensive line for the Titans is no joke. And I think it's only going to get better throughout the next few years. And that was much the case in that Titans-Vikings game. I believe that the Vikings averaged maybe like 3.2 yards per carry that entire game. And Aaron Jones is no slouch, but I don't think they have much depth in that backfield. Unless I'm mistaken, I can't think of really any other talented back in that backfield. Maybe they have Cam Akers. I don't know if he's still on that team. So that's a decent depth piece for them. So it seems like Aaron Jones is going to play, but that's also something to monitor. Joe, do you have anything regarding this Vikings run game against our run defense?
Yeah, they have Cam Akers and then Ty Chandler is their third string back. They uh traded for Cam Akers either either a couple it was I think a couple weeks before the deadline, if not like the week of the deadline. He was on Houston and they wanted to get another back because Jones was hurt. Uh I think he might have been back for that Thursday night football game against the Rams. Um but yeah, that's their backfield. Uh yeah, I mean, Akers doesn't really scare me. I mean, he was on the Vikings last year. He got hurt. They were going to re-sign him in the offseason. He didn't pass the physical, so then he somehow passed the physical in Houston, and then Houston, he wasn't doing enough in Houston, so they upgraded him to the Vikings again. So I'm not that scared of Akers. Aaron Jones is a good running back, though. And he always plays well against the Bears, so I don't know if he plays if we'll be able to stop him. But I hope we can. But no, seeing how this run defense has played all year, I don't believe we will be able to. But that's also saying, assuming they run the ball. Kevin O'Connell really likes to pass, so yeah, that's something. I mean, they do run it a little bit more this year, but O'Connell really heavily relies on the passing game, so uh, maybe we won't see a lot of Jones on the ground. But I mean, O'Connell's a smart coach, and he knows the Bears' run defense is bad, so you know you never know what's actually going to happen in the game.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing is that you mentioned it right there. Kevin O'Connell is a great head coach, and he knows what to attack on opposing defenses. And obviously, you got to mention Brian Flores, because that dude is just a mastermind when it comes to defenses and different coverages and blitz looks. And that's something that Caleb Williams is going to see come Sunday. Um, this Vikings team overall, I think at the beginning of the year going into this season, a lot of people, including myself, I'll admit it, overlooked this Vikings team a lot. I expected them to be, this was a try to compete year, try to be competitive more year until JJ McCarthy's ready to go for this team. And then in year two, they'd kind of take off. Sam Darnold kind of came out of nowhere. And I don't think really anyone expected that. I know Vikings fans probably had a better idea than most that this would be possible. But Kevin O'Connell, what he's done with that offense has just been super impressive with Sam Darnold. And I was not necessarily ever really against Sam Darnold. Like, I think he was a good player in his career. He's just never in the right situation. But he's obviously found himself in the right situation. And this will be a conversation that I want to have later on in this episode. But um, it is really interesting to see what they're going to do at the quarterback position in the future. You know, on paper, it looks pretty obvious, but it'll be interesting to see what, if any, team after this season will kind of look at Sam Darnold and maybe think of him as their next bridge quarterback. But um, Isaac, do you have anything relating to this Vikings team, offensively or defensively, that you think the Bears kind of need to key in on this Sunday to have any chance of success against this Viking squad?
Yeah, so generally the Bears play against the Vikings pretty well at home in Soldier Field. Um, the Bears defense versus the Vikings offense is going to be a bit of a mystery. I'm not really sure how to like what to think of it because I mean, like the Bears are missing a couple key pieces on defense with Brisker and Andrew Billings, and I don't know if they're going to be able to necessarily stop the Vikings offense. I think the Vikings have a much better offense than Green Bay. So we'll see how that goes. The matchup I am a curious or more interested in is the Bears offense versus the Vikings defense because we know how good of a defensive coordinator Brian Flores is and his unique schemes that he dials up and all those blitzes that he has. I'm interested to see how the Bears are going to attack that because they know at this point how the Vikings defense is and how they play. So I wonder what Thomas Brown and Caleb Williams are kind of talking to each other about. Like, okay, like this is going to be a way different defense than what we played last week in Green Bay. How can we, you know, win against this Vikings defense? And I think we're going to see a lot of like last week, a lot of really quick passes, getting Caleb in motion. Maybe we'll have some RPOs and stuff like that. But if if the Bears offense doesn't really get off to a good start, I think like right away in the first quarter or the second quarter, and it's gonna be really hard to win this game. Um, but this game kind of feels like one of those games where, you know, the Bears are 4-6. They're really it's things couldn't have gone worse this season for us. And I don't know. I just feel it just feels like the Bears can actually do something this week and come out of the game with a victory. And I do want to mention they are wearing their throwbacks, the classic ones. Those are really nice uniforms, and the Bears always seem to do well in those uniforms. So we'll see how it is. And Joe, did you want to mention something?
Yeah. So a couple things, a couple more keys that I have for the Bears. First of all, well, just things I want to talk about. So, Jalen Johnson versus Justin Jefferson is going to be a matchup to watch. I originally thought that they wouldn't be doing that because for most of the season, it doesn't seem like they put Jalen Johnson on the number one receiver. But Jalen Johnson was asked about that matchup today, and he basically responded with he's excited to play against Jefferson, and he's like wants to shut him down. So I'm assuming that they're gonna put Jalen Johnson now on Justin Jefferson. In his career against the Bears, he's played 6 games against the Bears. He was hurt both games last year, so other 3 years of his career he played both games. He has 400 yards, 400 plus yard games, and only 2 games where he was held to under 100. So that's not great. Um, I mean, the I know that Jalen Johnson has gotten better since 2 years ago, but I'm still kind of afraid against Jefferson. It's 614 total yards against the Bears in 6 games. So yeah, I mean, I don't not believe that Jalen Johnson can slow down Justin Jefferson. I just don't think it's going to be as easy as it has been all year for Jalen Johnson to shut down receivers because Justin Jefferson's one of the best or the best receiver in the league. I guess you can argue with him and Chase and maybe another receiver, but he's one of the top 3, if not the best. Uh, And then in terms of the Bears passing attack versus the pass rush of the Vikings, they're Vikings are the best passing. They have the most sacks in the league at 35, and they it's going to be interesting to see if if the Bears attack quickly outside, because that's most likely what the Vikings want, because that's what they saw last year with Justin Fields, is the horizontal game with all those bubble screens and that stuff that did not work, and didn't work last year when the Vikings defense was not good in the flats and stuff. This year they fixed that problem, so they cover the flats a little bit better. So even if we do the stuff we were doing last week, which was quick out routes to the sidelines, the Vikings can cover that a lot better. They're a lot weaker over like the middle of the field with like big routes and stuff. Uh, like yeah, big routes in routes over the middle of the field, but I don't know if the Bears are going to be able to hit any of those, because I don't know if their offensive line is going to be able to hold up and give Williams the time to do that. So it'll be interesting to see what Thomas Brown dials up this week for the passing game. But yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to say. Uh, Eli, I'll pass it back over to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to that. Over half of their total sack production has come from their top three sack leaders, which is Andrew Van Ginkel. He was acquired in free agency this past season with 8 sacks. Jonathan Grenard, acquired from the Houston Texans, with 7 sacks, and Pat Jones the second with 7 sacks as well. And then they also have 2 players with 3 sacks in Blake Cashman and Ivan Pace Jr., who are both linebackers on that squad. So this is by all means a great Vikings defense right now. And Brian Flores, I think with any other defensive coordinator, this is a good unit, but Brian Flores is just that guy, and he's elevated that team to an even higher standard than what most considered that roster going into this year. So uh, I completely agree. I think it's going to be interesting to see what Thomas Brown kind of concocts this week to go against this defense, because they're so good at just disguising coverages and making opposing quarterbacks have to really think. And that's something that I think Caleb Williams is capable of. I just don't know if he's mastered that yet. So this is really going to be a test of his pre-snap recognition and seeing if he is up for the challenge. And I 100% think he is. Now, I don't think he's going to go out there and completely torch up this Vikings defense. I think this isn't really a bold prediction for me, but I think this is something that hasn't happened in the last few weeks that we're going to see in this game. I think there's going to be an interception from Caleb Williams to where you're kind of thinking like, why did you throw that ball? But then you're going to look back at it and you're like, I see what he was seeing, and I see how the Vikings just kind of disguised that coverage and really made him think. So, I don't like to predict my quarterback throwing interceptions in a game, but I think this is going to be a game to where he throws one to where you're kind of upset at it in the moment, and then you look back and you're like, I see what you were doing, and you end up not being as mad about it. But uh, I think it's going to be a good test for this offense. I think it will show us whether or not, and we can kind of transition this into our next topic. Uh, I think this will really show whether or not Thomas Brown is for real. And before we really get into that, Joe, did you have something to mention?
Yeah, sorry. You mentioned interceptions. I feel like it's important to mention Sam Darnold and his interception issues over the past like month. The first half of this, or the first 7 games of the season, he only threw 5 picks. Over the past 3 games, I think he has 5 picks in 3 games. So it's a very real possibility that Darnold is going to give the Bears a couple of chances to intercept balls this week. So the Bears need to take advantage of that. They've been pretty good at that the past year and a half, but yeah, they just need to take advantage of that on defense. Um, that's all I want to say on the interception piece.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I can't remember which one of you mentioned it earlier, but the fact that Kevin O'Connell likes to throw the ball, I think, as you mentioned earlier, that's going to be a major piece of this as well. Obviously, he knows how to attack opposing defenses, but it will be interesting to see if our secondary can kind of capitalize on if Kevin O'Connell decides to get greedy every now and then. And Sam Darnold's a major piece of that as well. So do you guys have anything else to mention with this matchup before we kind of get into the Thomas Brown conversation? Another thing I would like to mention is that before we get into that, and we kind of thought to mention this last week, but forgot. Um, in that game against the Packers, Caleb Williams was excellent on third down and in the fourth quarter. So maybe I think personally this is going to be another game to where the Bears have to continue that trend, because this Vikings defense is one of those defenses that is going to put you in third and long. It's just a matter of how much rather than if it's going to happen. And we're going to have to see that trend continue from Caleb Williams to where he might have to put it on his back and make those clutch throws in clutch moments to kind of keep the Bears alive in this one. I think it's going to be a low scoring game because that's just been the trend for Vikings game these past few years. Uh, so it might come down to another, Texans Bears situation to where we've got a shot to win it. It's just a matter of has this offense developed far enough to get us in that situation to win a game. And that was the case also last week, but we also had that played out. But we will move into this Thomas Brown conversation. Last week, as we've kind of talked about, the offense has looked a lot better than it did under Shane Waldron. Now, whether or not that was us facing a Packers defense that just wasn't adjusted and didn't realize kind of what Thomas Brown was all about, and we just caught him on a good week to kind of give us a better offensive performance. This, as I mentioned earlier, this will really give us a good gauge on whether or not that's the case, whether or not he, as in Thomas Brown, is a good coordinator and kind of knows how to attack opposing defenses rather than, as I kind of said, just caught the Packers on a bad week. Isaac, I'll kind of start with you. Do you think that Thomas Brown moving forward is a good coordinator, and do you think that this week is kind of his prove it moment?
I definitely think this week is his prove it moment because, like you mentioned, um, the Packers didn't really have tape on Thomas Brown as a coordinator for the Bears. And he did have a good week. I give him credit, a lot of credit for doing what he did against the Packers because I'm gonna read something here. So in 9 games, when Shane Waldron was the offensive coordinator, the Bears offense had 277.7 yards per game. They had 108.1 rushing yards per game, 169.6 passing yards per game, and 28.7% percentage on third down. And in just one game, and I understand like this is a 1 game sample size, and we had to see more from Thomas Brown, but the Bears offense had 391 yards per or that game against the Packers, 179 rushing yards, 212 passing yards, and a 56.3% third down completion rate, which is almost double what was, previously with Waldron. So here's my thing. I was thinking about this, and the ideal situation would be if somehow, we were able to hire someone like Ben Johnson, and he's like, you know what, I want to keep some continuity on this Bears coaching staff. Let's keep Thomas Brown as offensive coordinator. He could kind of go back into like that pass game coordinator where he's not really necessarily making the play calls on offense, but he's still helping out. That would be the ideal situation in my opinion. However, if there is a situation where, you know what, like we're not able to get Ben Johnson because he's too expensive and these other head coaching candidates go with other teams, I wouldn't be opposed to having Thomas Brown come in as the Bears head coach. And then, obviously we all want Eberflus fired, but I wouldn't be mad if Thomas Brown was the head coach. Now, this is only based off of the game against the Packers. We still have to see the rest of the season, and it's not going to be easy. This is the harder stretch of the schedule for the Bears, so I'm not going to be as critical. But still, like it's going to be a testament to if the Bears offense can continue to improve with Thomas Brown. Um, I do want to mention something, and I saw this on Twitter that was brought up by another Bears fan, and he was basically talking about that he was worried um Thomas Brown is going to become like the Raiders Antonio Pierce, where we have this guy, a lot of people like him, he becomes the interim head coach. I don't think Thomas Brown's gonna be the interim head coach to say, but they really like him after, and then they keep him as the head coach, and he's really not the coach that the Raiders fans thought he would be. I don't want that to happen with Thomas Brown. But I don't think that would happen from what I've seen in press conferences with Thomas Brown, the way he calls plays, the way the players have seemed to really like him. I don't think he'll be like the next Antonio Pierce to say, but I would be happy with Thomas Brown as the head coach. I would hope that he kind of clears out some of the staff members, especially the offensive line coach Chris Morgan, because I don't think he's a good coach, frankly. But I would really welcome the idea of, you know what, if the Bears want to have continuity that badly, then let's just promote Thomas Brown to head coach, okay? And then we'll see how that goes. But at the same time, like there's better options out there, I feel like. And if we have the opportunity to get someone from another organization that has had success in the past and has a, experience in that field, then let's do it. But if not, I wouldn't be opposed to having Thomas Brown as the head coach. So I'll pass it over to you, Joe, and then for you to give your thoughts on this situation with Thomas Brown.
Yeah. Well, before I get to my whole if we should hire Thomas Brown as the as the next head coach, I want to mention that I don't know if you guys have heard this, but Shane Waldron apparently did not have uh Caleb Williams' feet married up with the passing concept. So that means like 7 step drops. His They didn't have those in the playbook, which doesn't like if you talk to anybody that knows anything about football, it makes no sense. I don't know how that happens, but the reason I bring that up is because Thomas Brown apparently this last week and probably this week too was implementing that stuff in the playbook again, which we help needs. He his his footwork just in general needs to get better, but like that's how plays are supposed to work, especially in a McVay style offense. And I know that isn't really like we thought that's what Washington's offense was, and it didn't really turn out to be that. But still, it's crazy that they didn't have that as part of the offense at all. Um, but yeah, in terms of the should Brown be the next head coach, I like listening to him in his press conference today, uh, or the clips that I've heard. He sounds like really he sounds like he could be a really good head coach. Uh, he sounds like he knows what he's talking about. He can instill uh good like not values, but like instills confidence in his players, which you need. And it doesn't seem like Flus has done that the past at least this half of the season, the first half of this season, at least since the uh Commanders game. But uh I think Travis Brown can be a really good head coach. I have a feeling that if they fire Flus, they won't hire they'll what they'll do is they'll clean house. Tom's probably gone. They'll end up getting hired by somebody being a really good head coach, and the Bears will end up, uh, hiring somebody they shouldn't hire, and we'll be in the same cycle that we're always in because the Bears can never get anything right. But if the Bears somehow do hire Ben Johnson, I still don't think Thomas Brown will be here. I think the only way you retain Thomas Brown is if you make him head coach, which I want to say I think the Bears will do, but I don't know if they will. But also, I don't know, like I feel like we're all kind of jumping the gun on this. Let's see how the next 7 weeks play out or 6 weeks play out. If he does really well the next 6 weeks or 8 weeks, however long is left in the season, then sure. If you fire Flus, you got to make the dude the head coach. I think you keep the kind of continuity with Caleb Williams, and like I said, he seems like he could be a good head coach. But if it flops like he did in Carolina, which I think he's even if we don't take off totally, I think he's going to do better than he did in Carolina because he has more talent to work with. But if it doesn't work out with Thomas Brown as the OC the rest of the year, then obviously he shouldn't be that coach. But I have confidence that it will, and I think he should be the next head coach. How about you, Eli?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation for sure. And I agree that we got to give it some more time for sure. I think if I were in charge of these decisions and we lose to the Minnesota Vikings on Sunday, you're at 4-7 and you are not going to go on a 6-game winning streak and sneak into the playoffs as the second or third team in the NFC North. Like that's just not going to happen because You just lost to back-to-back divisional opponents, and you still have to play both of them another time. So that's just unrealistic. So if it were me, and we fall to the Vikings on Sunday, and we fall to 4-7, and this just won't happen. It's a dream scenario, but you fire Matt Eberflus, you promote Thomas Brown to interim head coach, just to really see what you have and just see uh, how the players rally around him. You've already kind of seen evidence of that through this 1 week. Players have just come out and raved about the dude. Uh, so if the plan were not to promote him to the actual head coach in the next offseason, give him a shot to be a head coach for a while for a team. Just, if you're going to fire him at the end of the year anyway, give him a shot to kind of show the league what he is as a head coach and what he brings to the table. Like, if we lose the next 6 games, but we're scoring 25 plus points per game, teams are going to look at that and say, maybe this is a guy that we can hire to kind of be our guy. It just doesn't seem like a Bears move to not only fire Matt Eberflus at this point, but then to promote the OC to interim head coach and then to hire in the next offseason. That just doesn't seem like something the Bears would do. But at the very least, do right by the guy. Give him some time to show the league what he's capable of. And again, that's not a thing that seems like what the Bears would do. But maybe it's a Ryan Poles thing because you just saw how he facilitated the Justin Fields trade and has done that in the past for some other players as well. He tries to do right by everyone in that organization. So maybe that's something to consider as another aspect to this. Joe, did you have something?
Yeah. Just with the firing thing, there's no way they'd fire him after the Vikings game just because they're on a short week. So if they were to do it at any time, they would do it after Thanksgiving, which I don't think Poles would do just because I don't think he seems like the kind of guy to do that. And I don't think they're doing it, period. I don't think Foles is getting fired in season, although we all want him to. But yeah, it would not happen after Minnesota because there's no way you can put together, you can fire a head coach and then have everything look coherent in 3 days with an interim head coach. Sometimes that doesn't even work if they have 7 days. So there's no way they'd fire him after Minnesota.
Yeah, that's also a very good point. Something I hadn't even really thought of. If and also I think the biggest thing for Poles is that he wouldn't want to upset the Eberflus family Thanksgiving, so that's probably the biggest factor for Poles in that decision, rather than anything related to football at this point. But yeah, that is something interesting to consider. Maybe post Thanksgiving. Again, it won't happen. We can all just believe and dream all we want that it'll happen, but it's just not something that the Bears are probably going to do. But yeah, it is an interesting topic whether or not to promote Thomas Brown to interim head coach, and if other teams are going to kind of be looking at him in the offseason to maybe be the head coach of their franchise. But do you guys have anything else relating to Thomas Brown or how this offense is going to look against Minnesota? Any keys to victory or anything before we kind of get into our score predictions? All right. So I will start it off. I personally think that while this is a very good Minnesota Vikings defense, I think we saw enough progress offensively last week against a decent Packers defense that I don't think it's a fluke. I think Thomas Brown knows pass game concepts and he understands what makes sense. And he talked about it this week about adaptability and calling the play based on what he's seeing and changing that in real time and being able to adapt again. But this Vikings defense is for real. But I also think that not only is Thomas Brown up for the challenge, I think Caleb Williams is up for the challenge. He just looked so poised last week, and he seemed way more comfortable. And they were able to get those QB designed rollouts and get him moving. And 70 rushing yards I don't think that's a fluke by any means. It's an integral part of Caleb Williams' game that we really haven't tapped into this season. Only last game and a couple instances throughout the season before that under Shane Waldron. But I think this is a game to where the Bears kind of shock the world. And, the record won't still be great. We'll be 5-6, but it will be a step in the right direction. So I think this is a game that the Bears kind of win in a 18-15 thriller to where the Bears are driving down the field and they kind of exercise some demons from last week and kind of right the ship to where it should have been last week, and this is the game to do it against a divisional opponent that um, a lot of people have overlooked this season, but they've been on a bit of a skid. Now Sam Darnold can still produce. That's not, he's played well this season, but Joe, as you kind of mentioned earlier, he's been on a bit of a turnover skid, and I think the Bears defense is talented enough to take advantage of that. So I'm going Bears 18, Vikings 15. Isaac, I will toss it to you. Your score prediction for this NFC North matchup.
Yeah, when I was thinking about what we were talking about in regards to Thomas Brown earlier, he kind of reminds me of Brian Flores. Like they both have very confident demeanor and they both definitely know what they're talking about and it shows on the field. That said, like I was mentioning earlier in the podcast, it kind of feels like this is a game where the Bears can win. And it's tough. It's gonna be a tough game against the Vikings defense and everything like that. I know I saw it snowed yesterday in Chicago, so that's cool. But it like you mentioned, Eli, I think it's gonna be a really close contested game. I know the players are tired of losing. Montez Sweat was one of the players that spoke up today or yesterday, and he was basically saying, I'm tired. Like I don't know why this keeps on happening. Like we keep on losing these games, and I'm not having a great season and stuff like that. But I think it's gonna end up being Bears like 24, Vikings 21. And like you said, I think Caleb is looks way more confident, especially last game against Green Bay. He just looks like a different quarterback. I think it carries on to this week. And it's gonna be tough. And like you mentioned, Eli, I do think Caleb Williams is gonna have an interception. But honestly, I'm not gonna even be mad about it. I'm gonna be happy. Like I'd rather have him make these mistakes now when it doesn't really matter. We're not really hunting for the playoffs or anything like that. Like I want him to learn. And Waldron and Eberflus were holding him back from doing that. And finally, maybe this week, he'll just let it loose, and there might be an ugly interception, but the interceptions don't mean that you lose games automatically. Like that's not how it works in the NFL. And I feel like that's what Eberflus and Waldron were kind of thinking. Like if we throw an interception, it's not gonna be good at all. That's not the case. So I'm gonna say Bears 24, Vikings 21, and I'll toss it over to you, Joe.
Um, I don't know if it's going to be that high scoring of a game just because the Vikings haven't given up more than 20. They've given up 20 or more points only 3 times this year. Uh, so I don't think the Bears offense is going to be able to pass 20. I really want to give the Bears offense, or sorry, I really want to give the Bears the win, but I don't know if I can. Maybe in 2 weeks or 3 weeks when they play them again, if I see them play them this week, I can give them the win. But I think the Vikings have this 21-17. Uh, I think the Bears probably score late, but it's like 21-10 with like 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter. They score with like 3 minutes, and we hope the Bears could get a defensive stop before the 2 minute warning, but we either don't or Flus somehow messes up the timeouts again. So 21-17, Vikings.
Yeah, I'm not upset by that at all. As long as, to me at this point, this season is a wash now when it comes to actually trying to go anywhere. I think that at this point our schedule is just too tough to really make a run and make anything happen. So uh, focus on your key offensive players' development, whether that's players along the offensive line, Caleb Williams, getting that connection with Rome more involved, getting that connection with DJ further developed. And at this point, in all likelihood, it doesn't seem like Keenan's going to be back next year, in my opinion. So slowly trickle his way out of the offense and just try to develop your skills players along with the young players on the defensive side of the ball. But yeah, I wouldn't be upset. Obviously you want the Bears to win, but if the offense looks similar to what it did last week and there's still signs of growth and signs of improvement, I am not going to be too upset. But we will get into some of the other NFC North matchups this weekend. Lions and Colts will be playing at noon, so we will start there. I'll start it off once again. The Colts they are an interesting team this season. Like I don't think they are contenders for the AFC South, although that division right now is just kind of a mess. The Texans have kind of been topsy-turvy this season, and so has CJ Stroud, which kind of surprised a lot of people. But I don't think that this Colts team has enough, even with Anthony Richardson, to give the Lions a run for their money. Now, and it's tough to predict Lions games because you don't want to predict that they score 45 plus points every game, but at the same time, they've shown that they can just do that at will, no matter who they're playing. Um, so with that being said, just simply because of how dominant they've been in prior years, I would make this a much closer game because we just hadn't seen enough from Detroit to really put them there. But this season, they've just been an entirely different animal. Now, I think Anthony Richardson his rushing ability will give them fits at times, but I still think this is a 14 plus point game, and I'm going to go Lions 35, Colts 18. I think that's reasonable to me. Um, but yeah, the Lions have just rolled over everybody this season. And I think that's going to be the case again. Just not as many points this week for Detroit. And that's crazy to say, scoring 35. But Joe, I'll toss it over to you. Your prediction for Lions Colts at noon in the NFC North.
Yeah, I don't think the Colts defense is that much better than it was early in this season. It might have gotten a little bit better, but I think the Lions roll. Indy. I think I don't think Anthony Richardson is gonna play that well. He played good, I think, last week. In his first game back, he might play that same level. I feel like he's gonna play a little bit below, just because you got sat for 2 weeks. You're gonna come out firing when you come back, and you're probably gonna return in the mean when you play more. Um, I feel it. I feel like it's gonna be. I like your 35. I'm gonna go. I want to go 42, but I'll go 38 just because 40. I mean, we know that they can score 50 on anybody if they want to. Um, Not anybody, but a lot of teams they could probably score 50 on, which scares me for next week. But um, I think it'll be 38 to 17. But Lions. How about you, Isaac?
When I was thinking about the Lions Colts game, I was like, okay, the Lions are gonna score 35. That's what I was gonna say. And then Eli said 35, and I was like, okay, I'll put up a little bit at 38. And that's what Joe said. Oh, you guys are reading my mind today. But like you guys said, the Lions, like I can't not choose them because they've just been the best team by far in the NFL. And Anthony Richardson, like you mentioned, Eli, he's gonna give the Lions some fits, but I think the Colts are kind of like a weird team. Like you mentioned, I don't really know what to expect from them each week. It's been kind of a roller coaster for that team. And I still can't believe we lost to them. Like Anthony Richardson played probably his worst game of the season against us, and we still managed to lose. It's such a Bears thing to do, but I would say probably I'm gonna put it up a couple more points. I'll say maybe Lions like 42 or no, let's say Lions 45, Colts 17. It's just gonna be another blowout, and we're gonna be looking at our phones like halfway through the game. We're like, oh my gosh, Lions are already up this much. But yeah, that's my thoughts on that game.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it was the Lions Titans game. At one point, somehow, that game was tied up 14 apiece, and I was like, wow, like the Titans are giving the Lions a run for their money. And then I checked like 5 minutes later, and it was like 48 to 14. I'm like, well, that lasted all of like 2 minutes. I think that this is going to be kind of a similar game to where the Lions maybe start off slow and you check the score and you're like, wow, closer than I thought. And then you check at the end of the game and it's a 30-point swing. Uh, but yeah, I don't think this win would surprise anybody if the Lions have been rolling like they have been. So I think we're all kind of on the Lions ship with that one. But we will move into a historic matchup that traditionally gives the Packers fits, but this year I personally believe could maybe be different. Um, but this is 49ers and Packers, an NFC North matchup for the Packers there against the 49ers. But I am going to actually pick Green Bay in this game. I think San Francisco has been a weird team this year. I think they are experiencing the full brunt of a Super Bowl hangover. Now they are still 5-5, and that whole NFC West division right now is so competitive. I think 3 teams are at 5-5 right now. I just don't think they've got the talent, obviously, but they're just not on the same page when it comes to, their offensive line and the offense as a whole. Now, maybe this is the week to where they kind of right the ship and get that all sorted back and kind of cement their status back at the top of that division. But I just think the Packers have done enough this season to prove to me that at least this season they have the better coach in Matt LaFleur, and I think that's really going to be the deciding factor in this one. So uh, these games always seem to be close between Niners Packers. I'm going to go 27-23 in favor of the Green Bay Packers in this one, and I hate that I'm picking Green Bay to win a game, but until Kyle Shanahan kind of has shown that he's going to right this ship and get us back to the Niners that we know, I'm taking Green Bay in this one by 4 points. Isaac, I'll toss it to you. Your thoughts on Packers Niners this week?
Yeah, so the game's gonna be played in Lambeau, and I believe it's gonna be snowing or it's gonna be bad weather conditions during game time. So I'm not gonna say it's gonna be a high scoring contest, but I do agree with you, Eli. Unfortunately, I feel like the Packers are gonna exercise their demons against the 49ers because the 49ers have a history of owning the Packers recently. And the last game it was in the playoffs in Santa Clara. The Packers had a chance to win at the end, and then Jordan Love threw that interception. But yeah, I think like you mentioned, Eli, Matt LaFleur is a better head coach at this point than Kyle Shanahan. A lot of Bears fans have been talking. Maybe if the 49ers were to fire Kyle Shanahan, he could be a head coaching option, which would be crazy to think about right now. But yeah, I'm taking the Packers in this one. I think it's gonna be a low scoring contest. I would say maybe it's like 17-13 Green Bay. And I'll toss it over to you, Joe, and your thoughts on this game.
Yeah. Uh, just I think I was gonna bring up the Kyle Shanahan thing too. Apparently, a lot of Niners fans want not a lot of Niners fans, but some Niners fans want him out, which is crazy because even though they haven't been good this year, he's a good head coach. I don't know why you would want a good head coach out of there. Although he has been there for I think 8 seasons this year, and I forgot what coach said this, but I heard this quote today that a coach said that after 10 years in a place, then with a team, it's best to just move on. I know he hasn't been there for 10 years, but he's almost he's almost been there for 10 seasons, so maybe it's just time for him to move on. So again, if he's somehow available this offseason, yeah, the Bears should throw everything at him. Uh, if they can't get Ben Johnson. Um, but they probably won't do that. But back to this game. I agree with you guys. I hate to agree with you guys because I don't want Green Bay to win. I don't think any of us do. I think it's gonna be a close game. The Packers have a better run defense this year than they have in the last couple of years, so I think they'll be able to stop McCaffrey. I don't remember. I don't really know how well he did last week. I should because I have him on my fantasy team, but I don't know how well he did this week. I don't know if he had a good return game, but if he didn't have a good return game last week, then he probably won't have a great game this week. So I'm gonna go Packers 21-17. So I have two games with the same score, but not what I feel.
Yeah, I'm completely with you guys when it comes to the Kyle Shanahan conversation. Jump all over that if you are the Bears, if he were to get fired, which I do not think is going to happen. But a lot of people have likened that to the Andy Reid kind of situation with his time in Philadelphia, and the Chiefs were able to get there and swoop him up, and you've seen the results ever since. He's just one of the greats of all time. He's one of the greatest head coaches of all time. But um, that's a whole nother conversation. But to kind of talk about Christian McCaffrey just for a little bit, 19 attempts, 79 yards last week, no scores, and 4.2 yards per carry. So not as productive as he usually is. He also had 4 catches for 27 yards. So still that dual threat guy in the backfield, but that there's the answer to your Christian McCaffrey question. And Isaac, I did not factor in the weather in that conversation. So that is also a great point. It will probably not be as high scoring as I had thought, but you never know. So I'm still taking Green Bay in this one, despite all of that. But yeah, those are the NFC North matchups. Do you guys have anything else regarding our matchup against the Minnesota Vikings this week, or anything else relating to the NFC North? All right. Well, with that being said, as always, we would appreciate it if you went to all of our social media and share, like, retweet, repost, like all of our shorts on YouTube. Go to TikTok. We're on there as well. Check out these guys' articles. As always, they do great work. I believe, Isaac, you just wrote an article about head coaching searches for the Bears. Joe, you did write an article recently, Joe. I can't remember what it is that you wrote about, but regardless, check out these guys' articles. They do great work, as always. But for myself, Eli, for these guys, Joe and Isaac, this has been the Bear Down Buzz podcast, and we will see you next week, hopefully after a Bears victory against the Minnesota Vikings. We will see you next time.